Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weekly Dharma Gathering. My name is Sheena, and I will be your host for tonight's talk. Tonight's session, Love with Accountability, will be led by Aishah Shahidah Simmons. She will lead us through a guided meditation, a Dharma talk, and we will close with a Q&A session. Tonight's session will be recorded, so if you prefer not to be seen, please turn off your camera. And please note that you will also be recorded when asking a question. So if you don't want your voice or video recorded, you can feel free to pop questions into the chat. And if you have a question or a comment at any time during the meditation or during the talk, please feel free to put it in the chat, and then we will address it during the discussion and answer session at the end. The recording of tonight's gathering can be accessed within 48 hours via your purchased products on your Vimeo Weekly Dharma Gathering account. You will receive an email notification when that video is available. And now I will introduce you all to tonight's teacher. Aishah Shahidah Simmons is an award-winning cultural work. Sorry, let me start over. Aishah Shahidah Simmons' award-winning cultural work expresses its voice through the art of documentary filmmaking, writing, and activism for 27 years. Her work is informed by her lived experiences as a Black feminist lesbian, a childhood sex abuse survivor, an adult rape survivor, and a 19-year Theravadian Buddhist student and practitioner. Aishah is the producer and director of the 2006 groundbreaking and acclaimed Ford Foundation funded film, No, the Rape Documentary. And that documentary is an Afro-Les production. She is the editor of the 2020 Lambda Literary Award-winning anthology, Love with Accountability, Digging Up the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse. The anthology emerged from Aishah's work, Love with Accountability Project. Her third project will complete the trilogy of Black survivor-centered cultural works that utilize storytelling as a praxis for healing and ending adult rape and childhood sexual violence without relying on the criminal and justice system. Presently, Aishah is one of 19 2020 Soros Justice Fellows and a student in the 2021-2023 Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Certification Program. She is on Twitter and Instagram at AfroLez, spelled AFROLEZ. Aishah, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Sheena. It's really a pleasure to return to Weekly Dharma Gathering. And I just want to thank Weekly Dharma Gathering for the opportunity to share this evening. I also thank my current Buddhist teachers and mentors, Tereri Sala, Shantae Smalls, Gina Sharp, Conda Mason, and my cultivated Sangha of kindred siblings, too many to name, but they are also my teachers and my mentors and confidants and friends on my Dharma path. In the early 1990s, my teacher and one of my teachers and big sister friend, Toni K. Bambara, taught me the importance of locating myself. So it is through this teaching from Bambara that I begin with libation in the form of spoken word. I acknowledge all of the spirits that surround me, and I want them to know that I come in peace. I honor Mother Earth, who despite her constant degradation by many of its inhabitants, still provides the only home we know. I acknowledge the land where I'm presently seated on Turtle Island, now known as North America. I am located on the unceded Anacostan and Piscataway indigenous land. I honor all of the indigenous nations from Alaska over and all the way down to Chile and Argentina, inclusive of all of the countries and islands in between, whose land was stolen, whose children were kidnapped, whose people, women, men, two-spirit, non-binary, children were raped and murdered. I honor my African and African descendant ancestors who survived the Middle Passage, one of the largest human trafficking atrocities, and centuries of enslavement. And I invite everyone to take a couple of minutes to silently honor the indigenous land where you are located. And even if you do not know the name of the indigenous nations whose land it once was, just to acknowledge where you are. And if you're inclined, acknowledge your ancestors, known or unknown, bio or chosen. We wouldn't be here in this form and in this location without the land and without our ancestors. So let's just take a moment to reflect. Hmm. I honor the Asian ancestors who brought the teachings and practices of Buddha to this hemisphere. In the late 19th and greater parts of the 20th centuries, many Asians were castigated, maligned, censured, and punished for their non Christian beliefs. Despite this, they held on to their practices. And similar to Africans who held on to their spiritual practices against virulent white supremacist laws, Asians also had to hide them under the cloak of Christianity for safety. Lest we never forget that Asian Sanghas were the first Sanghas. It is especially imperative that we continuously lift this reality in the wake of sustained anti Black and anti Asian racism in America. And so now I want to invite you to either sit or stand or lie in a way that's comfortable for you, but that keeps you alert. We are going to enter into a brief meditation around discomfort and pain, particularly in light of what I am planning to talk about this evening. So find yourself in a comfortable position. And I invite you to either close your eyes or lower your gaze. Um, do not feel obligated to close your eyes. Just, or and if you don't want to completely lower your gaze, you can do a soft gaze. But just to get present and to connect your mind and body to this moment. Buddhist teacher Philip Moffitt, when he opens and leads his meditations, he talks about arriving, and it is a practice that deeply resonates with me. It is a practice that invites me to come to this moment. So it is in that tradition context that I invite all of us to arrive here. And where is here? Or where you're seated, or where you're standing, or where you're lying now in this moment. Collect your attention with a few full breaths. Let those moments collect your inner intention to scan the body and to see where you may feel or have any points of discomfort. And so just going from head to toe, from feet to head, just scanning in your body to see, are there any places that are discomfort, where there is discomfort, I should say. Being aware of the breath going in to your body and out of your body. And if you have difficulty breathing, you may also focus on an article of clothing, on your skin and how that feels, your feet on the ground, if they are on the ground, if you are lying down, your body on the ground, some connection with earth, to let that be a grounding anchor as you scan internally. If you have any places that are uncomfortable, that are causing you pain, discomfort, I invite you to gently call your attention there and just stay there for a few moments, as long as you can handle the discomfort. What happens when you become present with those sensations? Is there any attempt to push or pull away from the pain, or to do something other than observe the pain or unpleasant sensation? Acknowledge the pain and consider sending the message, this too, or yes, some message of acknowledgement instead of denying it or running away from it. Allow the unpleasant sensations to be as they are while regarding them with curiosity, interest, and compassion. What do you notice? Sense if there's a change, if there's movement. Is the pain or unpleasant sensation more intense or less intense? Naming what you are sensing may be helpful. Is that it? Burning or aching or twisting or tearing, stabbing, throbbing, continuing to notice how the experience changes. Even the slight bit of change, there is change happening with that pain or unpleasant sensation, each moment to moment to moment. You might choose to deepen the intention right to the center of where you feel the most intensity, sensing from the inside out this, the experience of sensations. If the sensations are strong towards the intolerable zone, pause. Explore a place that feels neutral or pleasant. For some, it might be the palms of your hands, the feet, the lips, another part of the body. If opening your eyes helps, open your eyes for a soft gaze. Don't get lost in the unpleasant sensations or pain. Return to the hands or to those neutral spaces that bring you back to the present moment. Allow space to regain some balance and perspective. Sensations can be in the form of painful thoughts. Allow them to pass like clouds in the sky. Try not to get caught up in the thought. When you recognize that you are in it, that is the first moment. Thinking. Allow it to pass. Come back to the breath or find another neutral zone that can bring you to the present moment. You may notice that what you're feeling is all sensations, unpleasant, pleasant, and neutral. Bring a gentle and kind awareness to any sensations that are unpleasant or difficult. You might explore going back and forth some, utilizing the zone that feels it's a resource, and then gently easing into a bit of where it's unpleasant, and then back again with compassion and loving kindness. In a few minutes, I will end this session with the ringing of the gong 3 times. Okay. Good evening again. So, when Shantae invited me to give to a weekly Dharma gathering talk in June, there are a few things I didn't anticipate when I said yes this past spring. The major one is that my partner Sheila would need to have knee surgery 10 days ago on June 21st. I smile. Well, first, the surgery was successful and she's on the mend. But I smile because I was so focused on choosing a date after this current Mercury retrograde that recently passed that I temporarily like had amnesia, forgot that when we make plans, life happens. So the more I try to control life, the more life shows me that it's not possible. Even when things appear to be in control for a while, something unplanned often happens. So it is after Mercury retrograde, and I chose these dates before Mercury retrograde, and things just were not as planned. So I'm really happy to talk about love with accountability. And I want to share some the questions that I included in my description. And so it's, what if we didn't weaponize accountability in the name of justice? What if we viewed accountability as a radical form of love, grounded in the belief that we are all capable of causing harm? Harm is on a vast spectrum. Most of us have caused some form of harm on our life journey, and it is often not the sum total of our humanity. Now, I want to be explicitly clear that I'm not the first person to ask or ponder these questions, that there have been for, I would say, millennia, but definitely just in terms of my lifetime and predating my lifetime, so many have, excuse me, I dropped something, have been asking these questions. And in fact, it's been the those who've asked the questions that I viewed as an invitation for me to begin thinking about these questions. And I want to share about how the term love with accountability, which is an experiential invitation to center the harm without discarding the harm doer, came about in my life. I am a childhood and adult sexual violence survivor, and I want to um, focus a little bit on my CSA or my response to my CSA as in childhood sexual abuse. I was abused as a child by my grandfather, and I told my parents, and they didn't remove me from the situation. And so the abuse continued for 2 years. And after 2 years, it stopped, but I didn't receive an announcement that it was going to stop. So I never knew it was over, but it was over. And I continued. I mean, obviously, I had no choice. I was a child. I was 10 when it happened and ended at 12. But I kept, my parents kept sending me back to my grandparents' home. They provided the quote unquote safe nuclear home. Um, that while my parents, who were and still are radical human rights activists, traveling extensively across this country and internationally, fighting and championing for human rights globally. And they didn't remove me from the situation. And so I had to live with that trauma and engaging. And I loved my grandfather. So it's a complicated situation. Fast forward many, many, many years later. So this was in the 70s when this occurred. It started in the late 70s, ended very early, 81. I I never confronted my grandfather, but many, many years, like 2015. So we're talking about 6 years ago. I started, I recognized my parents' bystander role to the harm that I experienced and started demanding accountability, wanting them to take responsibility for their roles. And initially, they did not want to deal with it at all. As far as they were concerned, that they had apologized, and they kind of treated it as a 2-year event that happened and ended. And I felt like I was like out of it. So, I mean, so upset, so enraged, just miserable. I don't know where I would be without therapy, without my Dharma practice. And I practiced Vipassana meditation, and it was literally on the meditation cushion because I could not force my parents. I mean, they're in their 70s. I'm in my 50s. So we're talking that long, there was no kind of forcing. We weren't even in the same location. And so I took all of my frustration, my pain, my ire, to the meditation cushion. And I remember just sitting on my meditation cushion, crying, enraged. I mean, just working it out. And I want to be clear that I also was in therapy, and I also had community. So it wasn't just me on the cushion, that there were other sources of support during this time. And while sitting on the cushion through these extended periods of meditation, the term love with accountability emerged. And the term love with accountability emerged because I love was being used inadvertently. I offer as a weapon. It was, if you look at how we love you, we've been there for you, we are there for you, and if you loved us, you wouldn't be browbeating us, essentially. And so the term love with accountability just emerged, and I started signing all communiques love with accountability. And that became really the basis of my second project, which was love with accountability, around looking at how accountability is a radical form of love and using love in its most potent, powerful sense. So not relationship love, even familial love, but love as a force. as a power that is all encompassing in for good. Um, and so really looking at how can we, is it possible to disrupt and end childhood sexual abuse in the context of love with accountability, how it first emerged, without relying on systems that have historically and contemporarily brutalized and marginalized um, communities, disenfranchised and marginalized communities. I'm definitely, my work is Black centered, so I'm thinking about Black communities, but I would offer it's all communities, and I include low income, working class white communities as well. That, you know, what does that look like? And then I think about it beyond just the family of origin. I think about it in our radical movements of change, where not only just sexual harm, but where harm is caused, where in the name of the greater good. So like sexual harm is caused in families. There is no greater good except for protecting the family. Harm is caused in organizations for change, and it could be even, you know, very conservative right wing organizations. We hear all these accounts of alleged sexual violence from, you know, right wing Republican politicians, let alone radical activists. That it's all over the place, and yet the desire to deny that it's happening, I think is firmly rooted in, I mean, in our criminal and justice system, and I am intentional with saying injustice system is very flawed. Um, and it, in my opinion, it's not looking for, it's not a place for humane justice. And it is very hard to have these types of conversations when really inhumane forms of harm have been caused, right? And so I think a lot about this in the context of a Dharma practice, precisely because for me, love with accountability came out of my Dharma practice. Like that's where it came from. Now I am aware of just the incredible, powerful work of transformative justice and restorative justice and community accountability practitioners. So I do not want to act as if that this is only in a dharmic lens or umbrella, but I container, but I want to talk about it in the context of that, because how I understand Buddhism and Dharma is first and foremost about not causing harm, to do no harm. So even when harm has been caused, how do we respond without causing harm? And I lift up the words of Dharma teacher Larry Yang, where and I want to be clear, this is not in the context of love with accountability, but it is in the context of what I think about in terms of how I strive to move in the world. If I can't be loving in this moment, can I be kind? If I can't be kind, can I be non-judgmental? If I can't be non-judgmental, can I not cause harm? If I cause harm, can I cause the least amount of harm possible? So for me, the question becomes, what is the response when we experience harm? And so often, accountability is used as a weapon. Accountability is viewed as punishment. Accountability is not viewed as how can we transform ourselves, the person who's caused harm, and by extension, society. Now I understand in order for people to be accountable, they have to name that they've caused harm. And there are many harm doers who do not name, who do not believe that they've caused harm. So I want to be clear that this is what it is, both experiential and theoretical. And it also, for me, requires a form of what I call speculative fiction in terms of how do we do this work now and keep chipping away with the affirmation that at some point that it will be a norm for more people than not. I think I want to paraphrase words from Alice Walker, and I'm going to change genders to make it gender neutral. And she said, and I'm paraphrasing, this is not a direct quote, the spouse or partner beats the other spouse or partner. That abused partner or spouse beats the child, and the child beats the pet. So essentially, when we feel powerless over a situation, we have the tendency to want to take it out on either the entity that has made us feel powerless or on an entity that we identify as less powerful than us. And I had no idea that today was going to be the day that the verdict for Bill Cosby would be overturned. And I've been thinking a lot about that verdict, which I've struggled with because I am an abolitionist. I strive all of the time to be one. It is a practice. I want to be very clear about that. It is not, it's not something where I am, I have to work at it, because I too, having been raised in a society, it's like, oh, somebody's caused harm. I want, I want people to be held accountable. And I have to be always continuously mindful that accountability, is not punishment. That and so when we look at the criminal justice system, I have to ask myself, was Bill Cosby being in prison, was that justice? I get, and let me be very clear, I believe that he assaulted, I know it's alleged, but I believe that he is guilty of committing the harm against many, many people, women. I also believe that he didn't do it alone, meaning I'm not saying that other people committed the act with him, but people knew about it. It's very clear. There are many bystanders, which is why I started in terms of talking about my own story. And I did not stay on what my grandfather did, but I talked about my parents, because they never caused me any sexual harm, but they allowed it to happen by not removing me from the situation. And so when we think about harm, we have to, I believe, look at harm on a very broad spectrum, right? That there are the people who actually cause the harm, but then there are the people who allow the harm to happen, right? And then there's the reality that the people who caused the harm and allowed the harm to happen, that they probably have been harmed. I know for a fact in my particular instance that my mother is a sexual assault survivor. She talks about the harm that she experienced in my film Know the Rape documentary. And even with the fact that she experienced sexual harm, that she instituted a sexual harassment policy in 1964 during the Mississippi Freedom Summer, she still didn't protect her daughter. And so, how do we hold these complexities? My grandfather molested his granddaughter. When his wife, my grandmother, developed Alzheimer's and they were going to enjoy their retirement years, he took care of her selflessly around the clock for 10 years. So, on the one hand, here is the man who sexually terrorized me for 2 years. On the other hand, here is the man who was the savior to his wife and my grandmother so that she never set foot in a nursing home, and was only hospitalized the last 3 days of her life when she fell. But for 10 years, he made sure that she was taken care of in their home. And so this is what and I don't know Bill Cosby at all. I don't, I don't know his story or whatever. I'm sure. In fact, I do know that he or his family, he and his wife, have done good in the world. That does not, I want to be really clear, that does not mean that he should not be held accountable for the heinous acts that he's committed against women. That, but also should the entities that were benefiting from his fame, from his meteoric rise, his star, his talent, and therefore look the other way. The same can be said around so many celebrities. I don't want to state on the celebrities, but I use that because that is a broad example that people can point to. What and so I recognize this in myself as somebody who's experienced harm, and aware of the ways in which I've caused harm. I've not caused sexual harm to anyone, but in terms of through relationships, through speech, through thoughts, through actions, how I've moved in the world. And while it is imperative that I move with compassion, that I move with accountability, um, I would hope that those acts, those when I have caused harm, that that would not be viewed as the sum total of my humanity. And so what I offer in the context of a, a dharma practice is recognizing that all that harm is on a spectrum, and that hopefully we're all striving or wanting to strive to not cause harm. And that when harm is caused, we definitely need to remove the harmed from the situation. I think that the person who's caused harm, they also probably need to be removed and censured, hopefully doing some kind of therapeutic work, uh, other forms of work where they are having to deal with the harm that they've caused. And this is precisely why I don't believe that prisons are the answer, because none of that work is happening in penitentiaries. None of, there are, that's not happening. And what would it mean if Cosby, if others had to hear about the harm that they caused from the people that they've caused harm to? I was fortunate where I never confronted my grandfather, but but with my parents, I was able to push forward and let them know, and continuously let them know, until we were able to get to a place where, I mean, and it might not have happened in this lifetime, where they were beginning to hear and take responsibility for the harm that they've caused. And so what I offer is how how can we move in a world where we are going to experience harm? I mean, it's pretty, the range, the spectrum is wide. There's very extreme forms of harm to lesser extremes. How do we move in a space where our reaction is not to cause harm in response to the harm? And that's not easy. It is not easy, you know and what does it mean if the person who's caused us harm, if they're never, when I say held accountable, I'm not even talking about from the state, I'm talking about they're never accountable to you. How does that impact your own healing journey? Is it can you consider moving forward and not allowing your healing to be contingent upon that person's accountability? That doesn't mean not trying to hold them accountable. That doesn't mean not speaking about the harm that you experience in an effort to prevent others from experiencing harm. I want to be really clear. But how do we move in a way that our our healing, our way forward is not contingent upon that other person? Is it possible that from afar that we can, um when I wish and hope that they get the help that they need to recognize the harm that they've caused? And is it possible that we, all of us, regardless of if we've been harmed and aware of it or not, can really take the steps necessary to not cause harm, in the form of, I mean, from as quote unquote minuscule as like talking bad around someone, to egregious forms of harm in the workplace, in our families, in our relationships? What is the work that we can do to really co-create a society without violence? And how do we, and while thinking globally, thinking politically around the environment, politics, and so much, if we treated each of our actions as like a penny in the ocean, like just recognizing like what I'm going to do, how am I going to spend each day by not causing harm? What can I do? What are the commitments or vows that I can do to not cause harm to another living being of any kind? And and that for me is my invitation, in the context of love with accountability. Thinking about accountability as a radical form of love, and not only accountability, external accountability, but also internal accountability. What is our accountability to ourselves to not cause harm, from the most like minute form to the most extreme form? What is the work that we can do moment to moment? And even when we've caused harm in that last moment, what can we do to ensure that we don't cause it again? And how do we see that we are very complex and multi-layered, and that most of us, not only have experienced harm, but have caused harm. And so in seeing that in terms of the totality of all of us, and moving in a way in which people who've caused the most immediate harm, that we understand that and see their humanity, because it is when we can see their humanity, even when they have committed heinous and monstrous acts. And I'm not saying that the person who was immediately harmed by those heinous and monstrous acts, that's not their work at all, at all. But for others to see that this is a person who needs support and help, and not necessarily a monster. I think that what happens, I believe, particularly thinking about harm, that unaddressed harm, and then therefore people who've gotten away with it and then continue to do it, that's when we have to then look at all of the bystanders who allow it to happen. So rather than kind of just focusing on that one person, looking at all of the systems that are in place that allow it to happen, and looking at the ways in which we are inadvertently complicit. And for me, it is my practice. It is definitely therapy. It is definitely my community and my sangha, where I'm able to hold these questions, these tensions, to look at my anger, my sadness, my pain, and work diligently to not cause harm while I'm on my own healing journey and just moving in the world. And so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Um, so many powerful nuggets of information there, and timing is so crazy that your talk is tonight. And as you mentioned, the verdict happened today. Well, got overturned. So much. Thank you. If anybody has any questions or any comments, I'm going to pop in with anything, please feel free to come off mute, or you can also add comments to the chat.
I wanted to, while people were thinking about a question, I wanted to share um, something that in the context of the verdict. 3 years ago, I was invited to participate in, to share my thoughts. A group of 6 Black feminists, Akiba Solomon, who is a journalist at Color Lines, award-winning journalist, invited 6 Black feminists to respond to the verdict in 2018, the Cosby verdict. And I want to share what I said then, because it really, I think, is really appropriate in this moment. And I wrote, as an incest and adult rape survivor, I'm elated that Bill Cosby was founded of sexual assault. I also know that prison sentencing will not eradicate rape culture, nor does it equate accountability and transformative justice. In an ideal world, Cosby should be required to be in daily counseling with a Black feminist licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in sexual trauma. I also believe he should be required to listen to the testimonies of not only Andrea Kosan, but his other victim survivors. I am unwavering that Cosby should donate a significant amount of his remaining resources to organizations that have a demonstrated track record of working to end sexual violence in holistic ways that emphasize community accountability, restorative justice, and transformative justice. Finally, there isn't any doubt in my mind that Bill Cosby sexually assaulted multiple women over a span of decades. Similar to all of the individuals and institutions that looked the other way for decades, while former USA gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar committed sexual harm against children, I also believe that there are at least a few, if not many, individuals and institutions who knew about the violence Cosby committed against women. We have to move beyond solely focusing on the person who commits the sexual harm because they often do not operate in a vacuum. It's important to hold Cosby and Nassar accountable, but we must also hold individual and institutional silent bystanders accountable. If we do not, sexual violence will continue to permeate our society. And so I just wanted to share that because as I shared, I that was my response 3 years ago, and I still feel very similar. I don't know if I would. It's such a complicated, the criminal justice system. I'm very believe that we have to move outside of these manufactured boxes of justice, and the power for me of this tradition that I'm in, the Buddhist tradition, but there's so many traditions, is that we know from all these historical texts that sexual violence, all forms of violence, has been going on for decades and centuries and millennia. And so for me, it's about what is, I mean, this isn't, these aren't new realities. It's just a new situations. And I believe I'm in the long distance run, right? Where I'm not only thinking about my lifetime, I'm thinking about, in the tradition of the Iroquois nations, future generations, 7 generations that that I just won't even know about, 30 generations. What is that work, that mindful work that we can do, to just, even if it's like pebbles in this vast ocean, what is that work that we can do to take a step away from violence?
I want to read some feedback in the chat. Something that I wonder about and struggle with is, how do we actually hold someone accountable for the harm they may have caused to you personally, like in a friendship or relationship? So the question is, like, how can we do that without censoring ourselves? Is accountability just expressing yourself and being vulnerable with your hurt and pain? Or is accountability leaving a relationship, for example, that is harmful?
Sorry, I was muted. I believe it's important to, I think everyone has to decide what works best for them. So sometimes it is important to leave a relationship or a friendship that is harmful. If it's I don't think it's good to be in a situation that where you're constantly experiencing pain, if pain is being inflicted on you. Like, so I think that is really critical. In terms of centering yourself, that's a complicated one for me, at least, because if somebody's caused you harm, um it's you I think it is important to share that, there, and and it also, and again, we're dealing with spectrums of harm. So I'm thinking about a friendship, like, there's so often, and I'm not talking about sexual violence at all, so I'm taking that off the table for now. There's impact, and then there's intention, and then there's impact. So, and there are multiple perspectives on on situations. That doesn't take away from the harm that one experiences. What I also know is that there are times when it's just like people may not even be aware of the harm. So if it is possible, and it may not be, I would invite, particularly in a relationship that you're committed to, vested in, giving the person an opportunity to know what's happened and to see if they're able or willing to be accountable. They may not be. Um, so I think that that is really cool. But sometimes accountability is, or I don't know if that's accountability or if it's self-care, caring for oneself is leaving the relationship, for your own well-being. If possible, it might be helpful to let the person know why, and maybe they can look into themselves and the work that they may need to do. But I think it is important that we take care of ourselves. We cannot, I don't think that we can be well while we're in unhealthy spaces and situations. And then there's a part continuation. It says, when so many systems are reliant on punishment as accountability, which it inherently isn't. How do I, as an individual, hold another accountable when I know systems who would not hold them accountable and would instead just perpetuate harm? This is for me where I believe, and we have we have to think outside of boxes. We have to think creatively. We have to envision what doesn't exist. And I say that because we're in boxes where accountability punishment means accountability. Like that's how we have been trained in terms of societies, and not only just in the US, beyond. I mean, and contemporarily, historically, that hasn't necessarily always been the case. And so I think it's important for some of us to look into our other systems of change. I mean, a lot of people don't know that restorative justice comes from indigenous practices in this hemisphere. There are indigenous practices all over the world, in terms of how that have responded before colonialism, that in terms of responding to violence. I don't want to romanticize things and act like, oh, everything was perfect before the colonialists come. I don't want to do that. But I do think that there are mechanisms, there are practices. I mean, even in the context of this weekly Dharma talk, for me, in terms of talking about how I study and understand the teachings of Buddha from 2,600 years ago. So I think that this is the work that I'm wanting and seeing and knowing people are doing, but that we have to continue to do, and hopefully more of us will do it. But I really do believe that it requires thinking outside the box. Of course, it gets complicated when we are dealing with, really unspeakable forms of harm, and how do we respond to those forms of harm. But I believe that it is possible, and I know that there are so many who are thinking about these realities. So in terms of, there is creative interventions, um, uh, it's a collective, but led by Mimi Kim. There's a site called transformharm.org, and creative interventions is creative-interventions, I believe it's .org, where there's a whole like 700-page toolkit that's going to be published like as a book very soon, like probably by August, but that really talks about various forms of harm and how to respond to harm, and like case studies. And this is, collective work of scholar, activists, and transformative justice practitioners. And the transform.org hub, which was created by Miriam Kaba, that there's so many resources there, and then that will lead you to other resources. So there are people, organizations, individuals, collectives that are thinking about and trying trial and error. And I want to say that it's not always easy, it's not always successful, and I think that there are times that people have like, well, I did an RJ, a restorative justice practice, or a transformative justice practice, or I know of this and it didn't help, or the person is still out causing harm. And so that's definitely the case. And we see that with the prison industrial complex. So I think about Miriam Cobbin, how she talks about hope being a discipline, that it's going to require trial and error and patience, while working diligently to keep ourselves safe. So I'm not saying making ourselves vulnerable, but I'm thinking again, long-term work with probably more mistakes than successes, but the intentions are there. And I believe that, I hope and affirm we will get there. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I also want to say I have a lovewithaccountability.com, the website there, that there are also lists of resources and books. Um, and the books are in response to responding to sexual violence. And also there are several books by Dharma teachers, Dharma practitioners around these issues, so that they're available, as well as links to webinars and conversations, Love with Accountability conversations. There is an anthology, Love with Accountability anthology, that features the writings of 40 diasporic Black adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And they all are writing about how we can disrupt and end this pandemic without relying on carceral justice. And so there have been, last year, because of the book was released at the end of 2019, and because of the pandemic, we did virtual book talks with most, but not all, of the contributors. And so you can hear them read from their essays, chapters, and talking about how they the work that they're doing as survivors to heal and to respond and ensure that this pandemic doesn't continue in someone's lifetime, in some generation's lifetime. So I invite you to also visit the lovewithaccountability.com, and also, and lovewithaccountability.com will take you to creative interventions, transform.org, transformharm.org, and other resources as well. As well as my film, Know the Rape documentary, which looks at sexual violence and healing, again, without carceral justice. It's available for streaming for $1 streaming rental, wanting to make it accessible.
Right. Thank you for the talk. Thank you so much for the resources as well. And thank you everyone for joining us live tonight. Always appreciate you being here live with us. And thank you to everyone who will watch the recording. We appreciate you a lot as well. Please stay tuned to the weekly Dharma Gathering newsletter for more information about our summer programming. And if you are not already a weekly Dharma Gathering subscriber, you can head to our website, weeklydharmagathering.com, and sign up for a 7-day free trial. And then you can just try us out and share with your friends, spread the word. And we're also on social media. We are at Weekly Dharma on Instagram, and we are at Weekly Dharma Gathering on Facebook. Aishah, thank you so much for tonight's talk. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Weekly Dharma. Thank you, Shantae.